This is Health UnaBASHed, broadcasting live on Healthcare Now Radio. Health UnaBASHed is a conversational platform where healthcare meets innovation. We engage top industry talent and dive into the heart of health and wellness, from vision to business model, to bring you the latest developments in health tech, to promising AI applications, policy, and ultimately impact on the public's health and well-being. I'm Gregg Masters, co-host and executive producer, and am joined by the digital health aficionado himself, author, editor, global thought leader, and in his executive capacity, steward servant Gil Bashe. Together, we're on a mission to bring you the people, the ideas, and the companies that are not just talking the talk, but walking the talk. On today's menu, we are in the company of John Nosta, a prolific writer, in-demand keynote speaker, and founder of NOSTA LABS. John is a visionary at the intersection of technology, science, and medicine. As the head of a globally recognized innovation think tank, John brings a unique, forward-thinking perspective to our innovation and transformational conversations. John's influence in the AI space is evident by his frequent appearances as a speaker at major tech conferences and his regular contributions to discussions about AI's role in shaping our future. His work in this area has contributed to his recognition as a top influencer in technology and innovation. Gil, the floor is yours.
Gregg, I want to thank you again for your ever gracious introduction. By the way, it was just great speaking to you last week and reviewing where you're at. A lot to be talked about in terms of the crazy health ecosystem, its fragmentation, and as we talked about last week, how it sometimes puts people's lives at risk. I hope people will listen to that show when it goes on to live stream on demand. We're doing a first this time, Gregg. This is the first time we've had someone back on the show for a third time. And I often want people to come back, but there's many people to speak to. John Nosta is someone who we make sure is back again and again. As many of you know, John is, he is really at the cutting edge of innovation. He's a disruptor, but not. He's really, I think, someone who has the ability to sort of peek around those corners and bring those what's ahead into our present. John, if you follow him, is a very frequent columnist on Psychology Today. I highly recommend people make sure that they're tracking with him on X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. He's very gracious. He takes his Psychology Today articles, which are frequent. I think he mentioned he's written just this month alone about 20 different pieces on topics that are very important to him and to us. And we're going to explore that a little bit with John. John also has been on the road quite a bit, so it's great to get him in the States. John has been in Venice. He's been in Poland. I'm sure he's been in a number of other cities. He really has become one of those in high demand speakers where industry wants to make sure he is in the room, kicking off national meetings, marketing meetings, C-suite meetings, sales meetings, and getting people to think. He is confronting their, I would say, their staid approach to what is, and talking about what should be and what is around the corner, as I mentioned before. John, thank you so much for coming back and joining us for a third time. I think you've just come back from Warsaw. Is that correct?
Yes.
The first time there?
What a first time there. What a fascinating place.
And historic.
It teaches us that sometimes we have to view our reality through different lenses, and the traditional American lens or the EU lens, or even, beyond just EU and Eastern Europe, they look at the world differently, and that impacts the way they interpret contemporary themes such as technology and AI. So it's a learning, and I think the reason why I'm on the show for the third time is because I not only speak but I listen, and I think that I'm trying to change my name. I'm thinking maybe I should be Gajan. It's a Yiddish name, Gil, because we've got G words, right? It's Gil, It's
Gil,
Gregg,
Gregg,
good job, good
and
John. Right?
John.
It's a made up
I
name.
will talk about the Poland
Yeah.
and Warsaw and
And
Eastern.
I'm Polish, right? So it was a bit of going home, which was really nice.
I could understand that. It's fascinating because we tend to think, particularly in the United States, there's a bit of a narcissistic view of American technology. I mean, obviously, Google, Microsoft, Apple. But when we really take a look often at people who are practically pushing the envelope on the application of information technologies, it's Eastern Europe. It's Romania, it's Ukraine, it's Poland, it's Russia. And I do think our sense of greatness in this part of the world may be even holding us back. I think when it comes to scale of idea, building, Apple into a behemoth or Microsoft or Google, it's understandable. We build scale. But on a granular level, when I speak to people who are involved in technology in Ukraine and Kharkiv, on an individual level, they're pushing the envelope on the application of the technologies. Did you find that on the recent visit?
Yeah, Gil, and I think you've touched on something that is integral to what's going on here. I spend a lot of time talking about hypotheticals and 30,000-foot views, but what people are hungry for are practical applications of this technology. LLMs are smart and sexy and appealing, and they're a novelty in many instances. Look, I wrote a poem, or I did this. So what people are very hungry for, and I think that's around the world now, it's clear to me, that people want practical applications. And to the people that work at AI, and particularly large language models, I think what we need to do is not hit a home run. I think that's too much. Get on base.
I'm with you.
Right.
I'm with you.
And oftentimes, and what I found very interesting in Poland is that it's not, the I word is not innovation. That's good. That's important. But sometimes their economy, their social structure, their healthcare system is not disposed for that. The other I word is implementation. That's the I word. And so I think that was very critical that, okay, so we have an LLM. It's accessible. It works. It has certain frailties. There is a tendency, of course, you can't do a talk on LLMs without mentioning hallucinations or confabulations, but those frailties parallel the human reality itself. So I'm not so sure that they are in fact bugs, but features.
I'm thrilled you've kicked it off in talking about hallucinations and LLMs. Not too long ago, I wrote a piece. You can access it on a cancer LLM called Dave AI. You probably read it.
Sure, I remember. Yeah, it was great.
And what really came across in speaking to people about that piece is people newly diagnosed with cancer can sit there with an LLM like Dave AI and talk about their questions and their concerns and treatments and costs for, they can ask 1,000 questions. And Dave AI LLM is ever patient and continues to sort of engage them. Try to imagine doing that with your doctor, the physician's assistant, the doctor's office, asking 20 questions for an hour and getting engagement. I don't see that happening.
It is functionally impossible. We have to recognize that, when we look at the frailty of technology systems like large language models, we have to look at that in the light of the frailty of the human construct. Physicians are busy. They're not good communicators. And when you're talking about a condition like cancer, the information itself is as toxic in many instances as the disease. So that's the unique thing. And I want to jump right into, because I think here's the kernel of truth that is so powerful with large language models. And it's that they can do things faster, they do things better. And everybody talks about these two things, and they're fairly common. We can debate the nuance of faster and the nuance of better. But what they do is a little bit like Waze. I believe that large language models are the ways of cognition. And here's the key point.
Great
it
point.
Lets you do things faster, it lets you do things better, and it lets you enjoy the ride.
I don't know about enjoying the ride per se.
Come on. I
will say this. I think that, talking about Waze and actually the people of Waze, I'm thinking of Yael Elish, who was one of the founders of Waze. She's created a health platform, real world evidence platform called Stuff That Works. off the ways platform of information. What I notice, speaking about what you've been doing and what she's doing, is it made you feel that you had some mastery over the journey, even though to some extent you were crowdsourcing the direction. And I think that the crowdsourcing the direction, we've always liked, you know what it's called? Patient advocacy groups,
Sure.
right? That's crowdsourcing direction. People used to belong to patient, they still do, patient advocacy groups. They went to patient groups, or they go to AA meetings, whatever. What's an
Yeah.
AA meeting? It's crowdsourcing.
But
lives.
Gil, but the aggregation and dissemination of information is one thing. But the delivery of cognitively relevant information is quite different. And let's go to Gutenberg. Okay, we had type and a book, and we could disseminate that type of information. That was the first of the information precipice that we jumped off. The second was Google, where it was the dissemination of facts. Both of these are dynamics based upon facts. They are they're simple reactions. Where we are now is the third transition into a cognitive iterative dynamic. It's the unlocking of thought. It's not the unlocking of facts. It's thought. It's cognitive. And I'm going to go back. I want to push on that a little bit because, of course, an iterative dialogue on cancer may not be enjoyable, but we can make learning enjoyable, the process of learning, because I could have it delivered to me in Spanish, in English. I could have it delivered to me as in Shakespearean English, as poetry, at whatever level. You and I know, Gil, we've both done patient tear sheets for the person on a statin. That's written by demand as a 5th grade level. None of the people who receive a statin are in the 5th grade. So it's essentially written to no one. But what LLMs, like the one you mentioned, it provides this unique dialogue, this iterative dialogue that sparks the genius within. It's tuned to the creative frequency of your brain. Now, and if you're talking about physics or math or Shakespeare, oh yeah, it lets you enjoy the ride. It's a cognitive ride. And that's fundamentally transformable at the level of Gutenberg, Google, and LLM.
You said a word that I don't know if all of our listeners can appreciate this, because it's a word that we need to monitor for, which is sort of LLM hallucination. And obviously people involved in the system are mindful of sort of LLMs making it up a little bit, right? That's also possible. And so the system has to be on the alert for the hallucination to sort of like engage and correct. And that I find is a unique element to this conversation, to your awareness of that. I don't think hallucinations are bad. I actually think it keeps humanity on its toes, because it means that there's a lifeguard to the technology. We're not just sort of saying, oh, hands up, I give up, let's let the LLM model engage.
So your hypothesis here is that the hallucination triggers a reactive posture to keep humanity on guard.
In theory, it should.
I see the point. I think that these models are extraordinary. Okay, they're extraordinary. And the ability to conjure things that may be outside of the domain of human interpretive capabilities is extraordinary. I believe that hallucinations are features and not bugs. Picasso, great artists, looked at the world differently and gave us a perspective that one would argue was a hallucination, a functional hallucination. So I'm very careful to give LLMs, people want to give LLMs lobotomies. So, do we take out the bad stuff? Well, that's ridiculous, because we are the sum total of the good and bad in our lives. And in many ways, the bad defines us more than the good.
Just dropping in, you're right on time for Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio. Today we're chatting with global thought leader, author, and keynote speaker John Nosta, president at NOSTA LABS. Stay tuned for the rest of the story.
I love this. John, because, to some extent, when we take a look at imagination, or, each of us has created for ourselves an alternative reality. We don't necessarily transverse life on a fact basis. what you meant and I interpreted is subject to the big question mark of life. You might have said, I didn't mean that way. I'm interpreting it that way, and I create my own fact-based reality. So to some extent, when Picasso looks at the devastation of Guernica and paints his vast masterpiece, people could say, well, it wasn't abstract. It wasn't that stark. It wasn't that black and white. But for Picasso, his reality was Guernica, was the painting Guernica.
It was unique. I mean, his cubist perspective was in part a function of the emergence of the theory of relativity and the actual disruption of the fabric of time and space. So he was informed in these things. In fact, I'm just curious about where these models can conjure. I believe that there will come a time, there may be a time now, where the output of certain large language models will not be fit for human consumption. Not fit for human consumption because
what does that mean? Tell us what you mean.
Our cognitive, well, first of all, we live in an illusion. Your fact-based reality is different than my fact-based reality, yet we cling to the idea that it's a fact-based reality. My dog smells 40 times greater than I do. The bear that was just captured down the road smells 3,000 times greater than I do. Our vision, our hearing is lousy, yet we rely on the stethoscope as an arbiter to hear an S3 gallop or a 1/6 systolic ejection murmur. That's a reality that is largely mythological, I would argue. So large language models, particularly multimodal large language models, the ones that can see and hear and talk, are conjuring a reality that may exist beyond the perceptual ability of humans. How do we even manage that? We live in a myth. We live in an illusion to a large degree. And do we want to have access to that broader reality through the context of technological augmentation? Of course we do. It's like putting glasses on. Without my glasses, I can't see. But I use technology to see a world that's there, but I can't see. That's the technology. That's the reality of large language model skill. I think that it is the third fundamental window into reality. The first was the telescope, second was the microscope, and the third is LLMs.
Yeah, you're out there, you're traveling to South America, you're traveling throughout Europe. Obviously you're in, for very good reason, great demand. You get people thinking. By the way, I have to thank you for our listeners. They may not know that John actually not only is doing what he does because it is his calling, it's his profession, but John, a few months ago, flew down to Florida to speak to a patient group just to help them, the Marfan Foundation. And I was in that audience. They're still talking about that session as
Gil, let's stop right there. Okay, let's stop right there because I want to follow up on that. And thank you for your kind words. Voltaire said that you don't judge a person by their answers. You judge a person by the questions they ask. And when I met with the Marfans group, they're brilliant. They had great questions. So it really was the nature of the questions. And that's what an LLM is about. You interrogate the LLM with interesting questions and you get interesting solutions. So again, I tip my hat to them because they're great thinkers.
Well, they're very appreciative to you. And I was in the audience, and if you haven't heard John Nosta, give a presentation, then you're missing out. Particularly if you're in a situation where you want your community to start thinking in a more profound way. Obviously, John can help with that end. Now, John, I wanted to sort of get into the audiences at Poland, Venice. You're speaking. Obviously, you shake it up. I've heard you many times. I'm fortunate. I keep on listening. What are the sort of questions that you're asked from the sort of the people at the helm of some of these companies in terms of large language models and augmented intelligence or augmented implementation, as you said earlier?
Well, I mean, the questions are, I often start out talking about fire, good old fashioned fire, because fire—
The great innovation of fire.
I argue that it's our first technology. It allowed us to migrate, stay up late, cook food to feed our brain, protein. It also allowed us to
fuel steam engines,
and to create weapons, to burn our enemies' houses down. Interestingly, the number one cause of property damage in the world today is fire. And so we haven't mitigated fire. We haven't made it go away. it exists in the context of the duality of wonder and fear. And that's what a lot of people are seeing now. And when you live in the poles of wonder and fear, nothing gets done. It's either this is the coolest thing I ever saw, or I'm running for my life. And we see this all the time. Fire, the airplane, classic example, right? 1917. That's a cool thing. I'm not getting in it. Yet it took us 67 years, one lifetime, to make it the most successful and safe form of transportation. I think that we're seeing with AI that intrinsic duality. And let me push on that a little bit more, because there's an interesting observation. When we talk about innovation is a double-sided coin. The other side of that coin is obsolescence. So we make a refrigerator, a washing machine, a car, a cell phone better. What do we do with it? What do we do with that 38-inch flat screen TV that we all lusted for, right? Remember years ago, my God, $10,000. I need that 38-inch flat screen. Today,
for $500, you can get it better.
64. Today, they're thrown away. You see them on the curb, right? They've become obsolete. Well, the interesting thing is, for the first time in history, the very first time and throughout the entire history of innovation, human cognition itself is on the obsolescence chopping block. Just take a breath and think about that.
I don't know. I'm gonna be the jury that's out on that. Let me show you why. Obviously, everybody has now a transponder. We don't stop and pay tolls and line up for 5 minutes at each toll, so we can drop our quarter in the basket. We just zoom through. And in many cases, the tolls are gone. It's just picking up the reading from your car, and you're still going 65 miles an hour.
But that's digital, Gil. That's digital.
But let me play that out. So all those people who sat there in the toll booths, who collected your quarter or took change, they're not there any longer. But I always say, when people say, "Hey, the horse's carriage got rid of blacksmiths," correct?
Correct.
Right. But what happened? We needed mechanics. Right, we needed auto mechanics.
I mean, the myth is that the pie is cut into smaller pieces, right? That's wrong. The reality is the circle gets bigger. The development of the camera did not eliminate the portrait artist. It grew the industry. In fact, it created this thing called the selfie. And no one even knew the selfie was going to happen when Brady did his pictures of World War II.
Yeah,
Today it's a new industry. But the point is,
Civil War.
What did I say? Civil War. Yeah.
You said civil. But here's an issue. I take selfies. You take selfies. Gregg takes selfies.
Sure.
Would you just sort of say to the audience at a child's wedding, "Hey, everybody, do me a favor. Don't pay attention to the wedding. Everybody take pictures and send them to me"? No, you'd probably hire a professional photographer. Hire a professional photographer.
Did you see the pictures in the 40s, 1940s and 50s of mostly men sitting in a train with their newspaper open, not looking at each other, completely fixated by the sports page or the editorial page? I don't embrace that. I think that's a bunch of nonsense. But the point is that when we talk about the transition from analog to digital, that's where most of us are stuck, right? They say that we are now in digital transformation. How many of us have had conversations about digital initiatives with our clients? That's kind of we're moving beyond that. That's yesterday's news. It's a cognitive construct. And large language models engage with us to advance thinking. So look, all the models, Gil, if you look at any of the basic tests on intelligence, they are surpassing human cognitive skills. That's why I believe that human cognition in its current form is on the obsolescence chopping block, hence leading us to that duality of wonder and fear. So it's complicated, no doubt about it, but I'm also extraordinarily optimistic about it.
The reality is the human capacity to imagine and implement remains unexplored and untapped. And what makes a Steve Jobs, or John Nosta, and other people who they distinctly are. I think that in each era we've had people with incredible, expansive, insight, and they've applied that.
What makes Claude? What makes GPT? There is a complex electrical neuroanatomy that is emerging here. Look, when our brain, now I'm not talking about the soul, I'm talking about consciousness, okay? When you're dead, your consciousness turns off like a light bulb, right? And it's quite profound. our consciousness is an epiphenomenon of neurochemistry. It's electrons, it's neurotransmitters, it's on-off switches. And this is completely analogous to these models, these large language models. So I think that we might see a new type of sentience. It's not human. Don't fall down the path of anthropomorphization where we would try to align all these features with a human form. It might be completely different, but the magic of it is that the operating system of our brains, our cognitive operating systems of our brains align with this tool. And that's language. Our brains, as you said, our brains are marvelous machines. They're absolutely incredible. They're optimized physiologically. They're optimized cognitively. We don't fatigue like our legs. We don't have lactic acid mediated fatigue. We could be on a phone call for hours, as Gil, you and I have. And at the end of that phone call, we are completely invigorated. We're not tired. But the point I want to make here, Gil, real quickly, is our brains are lonely. Our brains are lonely. For thousands of years, they haven't had a partner. LLMs are the perfect partner to enhance human cognition.
We've got a few seconds left. You've been on the third time. What's the next hot thing on your radar screen that you're thinking about right now? You haven't really sort of mined it like you did LLMs. What's next for us?
Well, I think, interestingly, it's a step back. It's the ability to implement large language models with some level of functional success. Let's get them into the hospital. Let's start looking at writing information, not information that is highly subjective and fragile, but a patient discharge summary or information for a patient on a statin. Write it for the 65-year-old electrical engineer and put in a bar chart. And my goodness, how about a p-value? That might be appropriate. So that's what I think is going to be important. I also think implementation, because right now it's people just sort of shrug their shoulders and say that's
You're
cool.
back to that I word.
But I really think we need
to
we need to get on base, hit a double, get on base. And there's lots of opportunities. That's happening now. It's absolutely happening now. And then, of course, there are broader issues around safety that are going to be debated. That's a tough decision. I worry that a lot of us get our information about large language models from one single source, and that's the Terminator that came out of Hollywood.
Everybody, we've been chatting with John Nosta. We've been talking about large language models, LLMs. John, thanks so much for joining Gregg and myself.
Thank you, Gil and Gregg. You do a great job, and you're the sounding board that really brings this information to so many people. Thank you.
Back at you, buddy.
And that, dear listeners, is the last note for today's melody. A huge thank you to our worldwide audience for tuning in, and a tip of the hat to our special guest, global thought leader, author, and keynote speaker, John Nosta, president at NOSTA Lab. Do follow John's work on the web via www.nostalab.com and on Twitter via @JohnNosta. Health UnaBASHed streams live 3 times a day on Healthcare Now Radio, Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., and 2:30 a.m. Eastern, and that's 7:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m., and 11:30 p.m. Pacific. Stay social with Gil and me on Twitter by @Gil_Bashe, and that's BASHE, and Gregg Masters, MPH, and that is Gregg with 2 G's. Don't forget to give your tweet some zing with our hashtag HealthUnaBASHed. Until we meet again, pursue your passion for better health and with no apologies.